Welcome back to Pest Control Unlocked. I'm your host, Konstantin Schwartz. Over the next two episodes, we're going to take a hard look at the four key companies in pest control: Rollins, Renticle Initial Terminex, Ecolab Pest Elimination or Pest Intelligence, and Anticimex. These companies will be shaping the future and what their performance over the past 5 years really tells us. We're going to use a pest control growth framework to understand not just how big these companies are, but how well they are actually performing and what that means for the industry as a whole going forward. In this first episode, we start with the market itself, because before you can assess any of the players, you need to understand the context. Then we introduce the four companies and tell their revenue stories. In episode 2, we go deeper, examining the headline numbers to find out who is genuinely winning and why. To start with, the global pest control services market was worth an estimated $27 billion in 2025, and it is growing at a rate of approximately 5 to 6% a year. By 2030, it is projected to reach nearly $37 billion. That is almost $10 billion of additional global revenue up for grabs over the next 5 years. In any industry, that would be significant. Considering the fact that most outsiders still think of pest control as a commodity trade, it is remarkable. And the long-term data backs that up. According to specialty consultants who have tracked the US industry for 25 years, American pest control service revenue has more than doubled, from the 5.2 billion in 2000 to 13.4 billion in 2025. And in that entire 25-year period, revenue only declined in the period between 2008 and 2009, and even then, the industry bounced back faster than almost every other sector. That kind of resilience is rare. So what is driving this continued growth? The answer is fairly straightforward, with several forces all pushing in the same direction at the same time. Urbanization is putting more people into dense environments where pest pressure is highest, and that shift is accelerating. Today, more than half of the world's 8 billion people live in urban areas, and the UN projects that figure will reach 2/3 by 2050. Climate change is extending pest seasons, longer activity windows, new species moving into regions where they previously unknown. Studies show pest species are already expanding their ranges by several miles every year, and that shift is only accelerating. Food safety regulation keeps raising the compliance bar for commercial operators. The regulatory environment becomes more difficult to operate in. However, the overall balance is skewing towards the professional provider of services. And perhaps most importantly, the industry is in the middle of a fundamental shift from reactive one-off treatments to contracted recurring prevention services. That shift expands both the number of customers and the value of each one. On top of all of that, technology is changing what pest control actually is. Connected monitoring devices, data analytics, digital prevention programs, and platforms. These are not just efficiency tools. They are changing what operators can offer and what customers are willing to pay for. The businesses that are getting this right are not just growing. They are redefining the economics of the industry. The pest control market is consolidating fast. Globally, the four companies we're going to discuss today now account for roughly 44% of global pest control revenue between them. But zoom into North America, the world's single largest pest control market at around $13 billion, and that concentration becomes even more striking. In the US, those same four companies control approximately 70% of the estimated market revenue. Here's perhaps the most striking illustration of how fast that consolidation has moved. Of the top 50 pest control companies in North America in the year 2000, only 20 still exist independently today, and outside investors have noticed. Analysts estimate more than 50 private equity firms are now active in pest management, attracted by exactly the recurring revenue, high margins, and resilient growth we have just been describing. The pace of consolidation shows no sign of slowing, but market share and revenue growth tell only part of the story. And in this industry right now, the gap between the headline number and the real story has rarely been wider. Let's examine the four operators at the center of this analysis, because they could not be more different in how they have grown, where they compete, and what their numbers actually represent. Let's start with Rollins. Atlanta-based, New York Stock Exchange listed, and the industry's most consistent performer over the past 5 years. In 2020, Rollins generated $2.2 billion in revenue. By 2025, that had grown to $3.76 billion, a 74% increase. Rollins is a pure play pest control business. Every dollar of revenue, every margin point, every cash flow figure relates directly to pest control and nothing else. Rollins has grown through a combination of strong organic commercial momentum and consistent program of disciplined bolt-on acquisitions. Clark Pest Control is one of the more notable examples, but in 2025 alone, the company completed 26 transactions. Unlike the transformative, debt-heavy deal that defined Rentokil's decade, Rollins has built its growth steadily, deal by deal, market by market, without ever making a single bet that put the whole business at risk. Rollins built its international presence largely through franchise agreements, today operating across approximately 70 countries through that model. But that is quietly changing. The company has been buying back franchises and converting them into direct company owned operations. The acquisition of Safeguard in the UK is the clearest example of that shift. International revenues remain a small part of the total today, but the direction of travel is clear. Now let's look at Rentokil Initial. In 2020, Rentokil's pest control division and Rollins were almost identical in size, 2.2 billion against 2.16 billion, essentially neck and neck. What happened next was the biggest strategic bet in the industry's history. In October 2022, Rentokil completed the 6.7 billion acquisition of Terminix, the largest pest control deal ever done, and overnight became the world's largest pest control operator. By 2025, its pest revenues had reached 5.7 billion. On paper, a 160% revenue increase over 5 years. In practice, and we will get into this detail in episode 2, the story is considerably more nuanced. Third is Ecolab Pest Elimination. Ecolab operates differently from the other three. To put Ecolab Pest Elimination into context, it sits inside a $15.7 billion global business. Pest control represents less than 8% of Ecolab's total revenue. That scale and financial backing shapes everything about how the pest segment competes and why it operates very differently from the other three. Revenue has grown from $750 million in 2020 to $1.2 billion in 2025. Steady, consistent, and organic. Its international reach is now driven by geographic expansion in the traditional sense. It follows its customer base. Where a global hotel chain or food manufacturer operates, Ecolab Pest is likely already there. In 2024, Ecolab made pest elimination a standalone reporting segment for the first time, a signal that management is now treating it as a distinct growth platform in its own right. And finally, Anticimex. If you're based in North America, you may be less familiar with this one, but you should pay attention because Anticimex represents a genuinely different theory of how to win in this market. The Swedish company, owned by a private equity firm, EQT, has built its model around technology-led prevention rather than reactive treatment. Its smart digital monitoring platform and insurance-based service model are innovations the rest of the industry is watching very closely. A defining moment in its international story came in 2013 with the acquisition of Flick in Australia, a pest control brand founded in 1918 and still one of the most recognized names in that market. Flick Anticimex now generates close to $290 million a year in Australia alone. Globally, Anticimex has grown from around $860 million in revenue in 2020 to approximately $1.56 billion in 2025. And an IPO on the Stockholm Exchange remains a widely anticipated next chapter. Put these four together and the numbers are striking. In North America alone, their combined revenues of $8.9 billion represent approximately 70% of the measured U.S. market. In an industry of around 17,000 operators, four companies controlling 70% of the revenue is an extraordinary level of concentration, and it is still increasing. But as I said at the start, revenue figures alone tell an incomplete story. The more important question is how that revenue was generated and what it is actually worth. That is it for episode 1 of this two-part series. In the next episode, we go under the hood, stripping back the headline numbers to find out who is genuinely winning and why the answer might surprise you. I'm Konstantin Schwartz. Thanks for listening to Pest Control Unlocked.